Distinguished guests, dear fellow Singaporeans and friends, our respectable ex-detainees and political prisoners, welcome to the launching of the book, the 1963 Operation Coldstore in Singapore, commemorating 50 years. There are some special guests here today. I would like to introduce them to our audience. May I introduce Mrs. Jean Marcel, in front of our first Chief Minister David Marcel. Dr. Beatrice Chen, Mrs. Lim Hock Siew. Rose, Mrs. Tan Jing Gui.同胞们、朋友们，对于有志于探索真相，了解我们国家的真实历史和当前处境，思考我们社会未来发展的人，今天发布的这本书就是这样的一本书。今天的讲台就是这样的一个论坛，今天的演讲者就是这么样的一些人。我们今天的这个演讲者里面有2位是冷藏行动的这个被扣者，他们是朱树凯医生和这个陈国防先生。有2位是社会主义阵线的当选议员，卢妙萍女士和李时珍先生。他们参加1963年大选，并在选举中获得胜利。可是，在几个星期以后，他们就被逮捕，放到了监狱里头。我们还有2位历史学家，孔丽莎博士和韩普金。To those who are keen on exploring the truth of our history, the truth of the present situation of our society, on the future development path that we should take, this is the book, this is the platform, and these are the speakers who meant for it. In the panel of our speakers, there are 2 who were detained in Coldstore, Dr. Ho Su Kai and Mr. Tan Kok Fang. We have 2 Barisan MPs who were detained a few weeks after winning in their constituencies in the 1963 election. There are Madam Lu Miao Ping and Mr. Lee Ji Tong. We also have 2 historians. They are Dr. Hong Lisa and Dr. P.J. Tan. I believe their discussion would provide us a meaningful afternoon. Let's invite our first speaker, Mr. Tan Kok Fang. 我们今天第1位演讲人陈国防先生，请。
Puan Jean Marcel, Dr. Beatrice Tan, Mrs. Rose Tan, tetamu yang terhormat, saudara-saudara dan saudari-saudari sekalian, operasi Coldstore yang berlaku di tahun 1963 sudah lepas selama 50 tahun. Pada bulan Februari yang lepas tahun ini, kita mengaturkan satu rapat umum di Taman Hong Lim untuk memperingati kejadian itu. 700 orang menghadiri di pertemuan itu. Mereka menunjukkan semangat yang paling hangat, yang lama tidak dapat terlihat di negeri ini. Ia membuktikan kepada kita bahawa walaupun operasi Coldstore telah lepas begitu lama, orang ramai masih berpelukan ingatan itu. Sebabnya tidak susah mengertikan. Kerap kali orang yang mengalami ketidakadilan dan penganiayaan tetap tinggal dengan pengalaman yang dahsyat itu selama kehidupan mereka. Oleh kerana itu, buku yang kita meluncurkan hari ini menunjukkan bahawa kita yang ditahan tanpa dihukum di mahkamah masih merasa kekurangan keadilan dan kesakitan hati. Kita berharap dengan buku ini orang ramai dapat mengetahui bahawa di sejarah negeri ini kejadian ketidakadilan ada berlaku dengan luas kepada ramai orang, terutama orang yang memeluk idaman keribuan suci dan murni, dan untuk membuat kebaikan kepada negeri ini yang mereka bercinta-cintaan. Terima kasih. Now I will deliver my speech in English. Distinguished guests, dear friends, it is very heartening to see you here today on the occasion of the launching of our book, the 1963 Operation Coldstore in Singapore, commemorating 50 years. This is also an occasion of joy and celebration, because after overcoming many hurdles and many difficulties, we have finally succeeded in bringing out this book. This we consider to be a small act of contribution to the fight launched more than 50 years ago on this developed land of ours for justice and human dignity, as well as for freeing all of us from the colonial yoke. Yet, this book of ours may just be one small speck in the great book of history to record the courageous act of numerous patriots who have made incalculable sacrifices. A more complete work of history lies awaiting more efforts to be made by both us here and the general public, as well as academicians. This book is in two parts. The first consists of articles contributed by historians who have adopted a more professional perspective to look at the background of the era leading to the occurrence of the Operation Coldstore, and who were instrumental in pushing for the operation, and what effect, both short and long term, this has impacted on the political ecology of this country. In their analysis, much of the historical material released from official archives in the last few years in the United Kingdom and Australia have been relied upon, you will see how these revelations have differed from the many told by Mr. Lee and the PAP propagandists. The second part consists of 11 chapters, all written or told by former detainees, with the exception of 2 chapters, which consist of an interview of a former trade unionist and elected assemblyman, Mr. Lee Si-tong, and a chapter written about the activities of the trade union in time past. From these, you get to know what the protagonists were engaged with and what prison life was like, and so on and so forth. Many who are present here today would find their shadows in those stories. I'm quite sure about that. One thing unique about the book is a list compiled of all those who were detained from 1950 to 2013. This being an unprecedented effort may be incomplete, and we like to call upon anyone who happens to note any omission or error to come forward and let us know so that we may make corrections or supplements as the case may be. Friends, Operation Coldstore has gone by for 50 years now. How many 50 years can a person have in his life? While we are comforted by the fact that following after the publication of the Fajar generation, the May 13 generation, and several other books of the same nature, we are making a small contribution towards breaking the silence. Yet, much work needs to be done. We hope to see more efforts made to further break the silence and open the windows and doorways for speaking out aloud. Many people have contributed towards the publication of this book, and some of them have given us continuous encouragement. Some have devoted their time to help us in solving a lot of problems. And some, of course, have also donated money in order to defray the cost of publication. These people constitute a large number, and I will not be able to mention their names individually, one by one. But in spite of this, I would like to single out 2 persons who have made incalculable contributions towards the publication of this book. And they are Dr. Hong Li Sa and Lu Miaoping. We know that Dr. Hong is an outstanding historian. And as one of the editors of this book, she brought to the project an attitude that is serious, that is meticulous, that is objective, and that is true. As a historian, she is by training to be one that looks for the actual happenings, and she would not let go any false claim, even in some of the articles that we have submitted. Now, among the 3 of us, she has been working the hardest. In other words, she has been the person who has toiled the most. I often have to apologize to her that I have not been doing much good. Now, the answer she gave was that, well, I'm younger than all the two of you, and therefore I should work harder. Thank you, Lisa. I would say without you, we will not be able to see this book today. The other person is Madam Lu Miaoping. I call her big sister. She has to compile, actually from nothing, a list of detainees who have been detained from the year 1950 to the year 1913. You can imagine how heavy this task is. Now, she often has to go around chasing after our friends to get more information. She would often use the telephone to also ask around. And sometimes, if she can't contact anyone using the telephone, she would visit them. Of course, it is a very frequent occasion when she visits the public library to look for old newspapers. And from there, she would be able to find, if she's lucky, she's able to find certain names being published. But even after the names have been acquired, she will still have to check the Chinese name and the English name. And as you know, sometimes this can be very confusing. Now, this work demands not only hard work and a lot of energy, one has also got to be very patient and with good eyesight. I'm very happy to note that 我们的大姐, our big sister, is also very well versed with the computer. Even at her age, she is able to work on the computer without any problem, and you can imagine how important a computer is in the compilation of such a long list, as you can see in the book that many of you have bought. So, let me now represent you, on behalf of you, to thank the two ladies. Thank them for their effort. Now, recently, I met with a scholar, a young scholar, and when the discussion got onto the question of Operation Coldstore, this young scholar, without hesitation, told me this. He said, Mr. Tan, do you know, they put you people in Coldstore. Now you are out. Those who were not put in Coldstore, what happened to them? Now, we know that things that are put in Coldstore remain their freshness, especially when they are taken out. So, those that did not go into Coldstore have become stale or even rotten. Now, the philosophical overtone of this may turn into reality. Who knows? Let's wait and see. Thank you very much. Let me now say this in Mandarin. 各位嘉宾，各位新旧朋友，很高兴跟大家在今天在这里见面，为纪念冷藏行动50周年而出版的新书发布会进行交流，同时也为新书冲破重重困难，终于在众人的努力之下得以出版，得以跟大家见面。我们可以一同，今天的气氛就是一同来欢庆。 为了反殖以及为正义事业与人类尊严而展开不懈斗争。在座的许多朋友，跟无数已经离开我们而安息与长眠在天一方的先烈们，都曾经参与并做出巨大贡献的一段重要历史的回顾、缅怀与记忆。我们总算尽了一点点应尽的绵力，但是这本书所覆盖的范围还是不能说是够全面的，或是够深入的，更不能说是圆满的。如果真要说的话呢，它只能说是在一部伟大的人民斗争历史的一个小小的片段，或是一个不起眼的章节而已。要把这部历史写好，还有待包括大家在内、学者在内的真理的追求者的继续努力。这本书分2部分，第一部分是有3章，分别由3位历史学家从学术的角度，客观讨论冷藏行动的时代背景，它为什么会发生？是哪一帮人马在背后策划与推动，以及它对新加坡的政治生态带来怎样的恶劣影响等等，都做了详尽的表述跟分析。文章作者引经据典，特别是查阅了大量英国跟澳洲2国近数年来陆续公开于世的国家档案资料，使原来可能仅仅只是停留在臆测揣度的观察，像是透过了显微镜一样，清清楚楚地摆在人们的面前。李光耀先生过去试图掩人耳目的许多丑行，全部都暴露在阳光底下了。书的第2部分共分11章，除了其中2章之外，其他全是居留者的个人作品，讲述他们被逮捕前的活动、狱中的生活、狱中展开的各种斗争、遭受怎样的虐待、黑牢生活给自己家人留下哪些不可磨灭的烙印等等。这些经历在座各位冷藏行动的幸存者都可以从中找到自己的影子，感同身受。对那一伙凶狠无情、没有人性的政治流氓与政治斗争，我们现在都有了血淋淋的认识。书中还刊登了一个清单，罗列了从1950年到2013年在未经审讯的情况下被内安法令逮捕的人士的名单。这是前所未有的一项工作，但因为时间跨度很大，资料不全，差错在所难免。在座的朋友如果发现其中有任何失误的地方，请告诉我们，让我们更正。朋友们，冷藏行动过去整整50年了，我们不禁要问：人生到底有几个50年？因此，对本书可能出现的任何不足的地方，我们应该也很乐意的纠正或补充。同时也希望更多朋友加入到这个讲故事的行列，以各种各样的形式，或亲自自笔，或利用口述来充实我们的历史。毕竟我们大家曾经走过一段不平凡的道路，你们说是不是？值得后人参考与借鉴。这本书问世，跟《华惹时代风云》《情系513》等书的出版，在力图打破多年的沉默的道路上，我们大家又迈开了一大步。 这本书的成功出版是许多共同努力的结果，许多人共同努力的结果。有的人关心我们的进展，不断给我们鼓励；有的人出力为纷繁的事物奔波；有的人出钱资助，因为人数众多，是我不能一一道谢。尽管如此，我还是要借这个机会，对2位为本书出版做出最大付出的可敬可爱的女士，表示最深切的感谢。她们是孔丽莎博士和卢妙萍大姐。大家都知道，孔丽莎博士是一位杰出的历史学家，作为本书的其中一位编者。他做学问的态度是严谨的、细致的、客观的、真诚的。他带给我们的是一个历史学家求实、求真、求正的精神。这一点，在他从来都不马虎审阅各篇文章的作风中表现得无疑。我们编辑组3人中，他的工作量最大，但他从来没有发出怨言。我常常为了自己的邋遢的不良作风向他赔罪时，他总是这样回答我：“我比你们更年轻，多做一点是应该的。”谢谢你，丽莎。要是没有你，这本书真会胎死腹中。妙萍大姐的功劳可不小，她为了收集被捕人士的资料与编辑出一份完整的名单而四处奔波，常常不是打电话，就是亲自登门造访去查问，又常常到图书馆去翻阅旧报纸，从蛛丝马迹中数人数找人名，等到找到了报纸上面的名字，还得多方去求证，使得中英名字都能够相符，真是不容易。这项工作不但费力，还要有耐心，而且眼力还要好。而大姐的电脑操作功力还真不小，那么多的资料，没有熟练的电脑操作技术的帮助，根本就完成不了。现在，且让我代表大家向2位女中豪杰敬礼，并表示深深的感谢。谢谢大家。
谢谢陈国芳先生。下来我们的演讲人是这本书的大功臣洪丽莎博士。Dr. Hong Lisa will be our next speaker.
Thank you, everyone. There is no way I can express the privilege I have in being involved in this project. Okay? And I can tell you what happened to poor Madam Miao Ping's computer. It died. Fortunately, when her work was over and she had sent me her files. It saved her the work of helping me and helping the editors to do the proofreading for the Chinese version. Okay? Right, now if I had only 5 minutes, I think I'll know what I'll spend a lot of the 5 minutes on. It's on thanking our translators. We have profusely thanked them in the book, but to me, the translation is such an important part of the book. As authors, we feel so grateful to the translators for opening another readership, a larger readership than somebody like myself who writes only in English would ever can get. The work we can, it's no, it's no exaggeration to talk about the dedication, the painstaking efforts, the scholarship that had to go in to making our Chinese version one that this book, that our readership deserves. Okay? And here I must mention Mr. Gotek Nam, who was a real the minute he saw that there was this work to be done, he volunteered himself all times of day and night to say and said, just let me know what I need to do. And it was done. It was really amazing. Okay? And I haven't even met Mr. Goh Teck Nam before. I just was introduced to him, his grandson and his wife about 15 minutes ago. I know his voice though because he calls and says, Lisa, can or not? Okay? Yeah. The other people I would like to thank very much is our team from Malaysia, our publisher Pak Chong, okay, who has been responsible for this series of books that have been put out. He very, I wouldn't say graciously, right, but he very, very kindly said, okay, you can stick to your date of book launch 16 November. Very, very tight. But you all do your work, I will see that it will be out. Okay, well, we did our part, he did his part. Okay? His staff member who I was constantly on email with at one time, Janice, told me, wow, your book cut all the queues. I mean, his office practically stopped just to do our book. Gareth Richards is our copy editor for the English version. Nothing much to say about Gareth, except that his motto is, I edit everything. Boy. And he was ably assisted by Miss Jamie Hung. I think Jamie is fairly new to working with Gareth, but he really threw her into the real deep end of the pool because our book is very demanding to edit, given that we had this 1,192 name lists for her to go through. Okay? So thank you all three of you, and would you believe it? They made the trip all the way to be here with us today. This book means so much to so many people. This book is so special. Okay? But looking at the turnout here, we prepared for 300 people, which I thought was sort of magnificent. I think we have far exceeded the numbers here. Okay? It seems so obvious to us all in this room today that, of course, we should have an event to mark 50 years of Operation Coldstore. I think I'm one of the very few people, maybe one or two others in this room, who remember how it all started, and you wouldn't believe it. It started when a Malaysian academic friend visited the late Tan Jin Hui one day about 3 years ago, while we were working on the May 13 generation book and the translation of The Mighty Wave. And she said to Jin Hui, do you know that 50th anniversary of Operation Coldstore is just a couple of years ahead? We expect a book from you. And Jin Hui said, what? No idea that Coldstore 50th anniversary was 2-3 years ahead of us. Okay, and I'm sure that was what the rest of us would also sort of be ignorant, maybe not cognizant of. There is this big anniversary that needs to be marked. Okay? For a person like Jin Hui to forget, I think says it all. Right? By the way, it's 2014 next year. Does it ring a bell? May 13, student anti-conscription movement, Fajar generation, 60 years. You see, we don't remember. All right, perhaps we should. Okay, now that we do, I'll leave it to you guys. But commemorate or marking historical events, especially of the left in Singapore, all right, is as can be expected, not a regular feature of our lives. May 13, 1954, where the Chinese school students marched. No, they didn't march. They sort of petitioned the governor for exemption of conscription on grounds that they were students. There was an altercation with the police, and it really started, to my mind, the mass anti-colonial movement in Singapore. Okay? That event was celebrated, was commemorated among the students almost every year since then, especially with the formation of the Singapore Chinese Middle School Students' Union. But when the political climate changed in the early 1960s, okay, their celebrations became more and more politically fraught. Okay? The last I could find from the newspapers, and I could well be wrong, was the celebration in 1962, okay, May 13, and that happened just before the Commission of Inquiry into the boycott of the Chinese secondary school Sec 4 examinations, okay, which again, sort of is one of these events that are marked in our official history as this is the Chinese school students creating trouble instigated by the communists and sort of bringing instability to the society, to the country. Okay? It was preceding that was the May 13 school celebrations on the part of the students, and just to show you how off the mark the students were. May 13 was in fact expected by the students to be named Youth Day or Students' Day in Singapore, right? So confident of them, of their own contributions to our history, and so blind, I suppose, to the fact that the authorities would certainly see it in quite a different way. Okay? Now, Kok Fang has described this book very thoroughly. I would like to say maybe a word or two about it. To me, this book is first and foremost the memoirs, okay, of former political detainees. Okay? But here I must qualify, because we set certain parameters on the authors that we hope would contribute. Okay? In fact, there's only one parameter, I'm sorry, that we set, and that is that they must be Singaporeans. Okay? Of course, former political detainees, Operation Coldstore and the others, a lot of the people were banished. A lot of the people have left Singapore to live overseas, to live in other countries. They may be holding other citizenships now. We have specifically excluded them from the volume. Okay? The reason is simple. The reason is that I think this book speaks to the Singapore context. Okay? And that is important to keep. Okay? The other point I think is also a point of, perhaps let's call it integrity, that because the contributors are Singaporean citizens, they live in Singapore, they are legally liable, okay, and will present themselves to answer any charges should any be levied as a result of what they write in the book. Okay, so we want to preserve a certain integrity, and hence this kind of delineation. Okay? It is foremost, as I've said, a memoir. Okay, it comprises largely memoirs of political detainees. Now, memoirs, as with all sorts of writings and narratives and everything else, has two elements to it which are contradictory, but which are actually maybe complementary. Okay, and that is what we remember, what we forget, brackets, including what we choose to forget. Alright, so when we read these memoirs, or when we read even the academic sections, we have to be aware that what we read, okay, presents what the author wants us to know, what he thinks or what she thinks is important to know, how she or he remembers a certain event, sees a certain event, and analyzes a certain event. Even though the chapters in the book, okay, have this general pattern that all the authors who are former political detainees affirm that their arrests and detentions were made on totally baseless grounds. How they remember, not necessarily the same. In fact, I would say it is the differences that is interesting, that is significant, and that is what the readership might want to look into when reading. It makes the reading, sort of far more stimulating. Okay? Look at how far we have come on this score. Not that the earlier works are not stimulating. I like to trace, sort of where we started, and a simple way of tracing is to say, remember the books by Said Zahari, and remember the book Comet in the Sky on Lim Chin Siong, 2001, I think it was. Okay? The first political memoirs, the first appreciation of Lim Chin Siong that was published, the covers were, of course, Said Zahari's photo, Lim Chin Siong's photograph. Okay? Then we come to 2009, Fajar generation. A number of photographs of a number of people. Okay? May 13 generation, more stylized. We had a palm tree with the names of Chinese schools, a community of people. Look at our present book. It is this icon, okay, that makes us want to say, what has a chair missing one leg got anything to do with Operation Coldstore, right? I think, sort of is a provocative icon. It leads us to ponder what is lacking, what is missing, what has been taken away from us, or perhaps the chair was not complete. It's up to us to make those links. Okay? So the whole idea is to make this whole exercise of remembering, of history writing, a little more complex than just one side versus another side. Okay? Now, to me, why is Singapore history so much stuck into this idea of black or white? Okay? Right or wrong? It is because perhaps we don't even have a political history yet after the British ceded power. Okay? What I mean by that is that Singapore has been ruled by the PAP since 1959. What it means is that what the PAP did not do, did not say from 1959, okay, in 1959 and thereafter, is still something that the party, the government, has to answer for, has to defend itself, at least that's how they see it. It has not yet been historicized. If there had been changes in government, like in most parts of the world, I'm not saying good or bad, okay, but if there had been historical changes, then these things that happened 50 years ago would have been historicized. Okay? That is why we have archives which have 30-year rules, 50-year rules, 25-year rules, because that is the distance that is deemed the maximum perhaps, or is sufficient for documents to be released, for people to contemplate the past, to examine, understand complexities and so forth. In Singapore, that process is really not there yet. Okay? So what we end up with largely, I would say, is polemics, not history. All right? It's a very polarized idea of how our society was. Okay? One side saying that we are the good guys, the other side saying the contrary. Okay? Now, I would like to say that I don't think that's very healthy for our society. And with that, I'll give you a short example of my chapter in the book, okay, which, I had a very hard time coming up with a topic to write, okay, because I'm not going to use the colonial archives the way PJ Cup does and so forth. Right? It's in London, I'm not going there. It's Kew, I'm not going there. And I think there are enough people looking at the colonial records. I set out to say, I want to write something that happened in Singapore. Nothing necessarily to do with Internal Security Council and Tunku and Lee Kuan Yew and bargaining and all that. So, two obvious areas came up. One is the trade unions, one is the education. In the end, I found that the education materials were more available, were sort of, there was more of that for me to work on. And I narrowed it down to this 1961 Chinese exam boycott. Okay, in 61, for the first time, the PAP government wanted to have a uniform exam system across the four language streams. Okay, so meaning that the Chinese schools used to have what they call a 3-3 system: 3 years junior, secondary, 3 years junior middle, 3 years senior middle. Most students would go through a 6-year secondary and school education, or middle school education. But when the PAP came into power and everybody agreed with it, let's standardize. Okay, and the government said we want to standardize according to the English stream. That is the Cambridge School Certificate level 4 and then additional 2. Okay. Now, as it turned out, this became a very hot issue with the Chinese schools. Okay, because of course, 4 and 2 means that most people stopped at 4 in those days. The government actually had a cap, and everybody knew that, of 20% that would then go on to your A-levels or higher school certificate, and then even a smaller number goes into university. Okay? So, in other words, the Chinese schools, basically the students were no longer could expect that they'll have a 6-year education. Okay? Fine. Then the question is, what then do they do when they graduate from Sec 4? This was an issue that, of course, came with this introduction. Okay? Amazingly to me, that was the revelation. The Chinese schools, meaning Chinese education circles, did not have any opposition, were not at all in opposition to this change in system, which meant a smaller number would go on to 6 years of education, provided that the government could make sure that there were other pathways, whether it be polytechnics, whether it be institute of education, whether it be technological schools, whatever, you know. And all the time, especially by 1960s, 1961, the early months, the government had no answer to this. But again, the Chinese newspapers and all that were all right with it. No, oh yeah, you know, we wait, we'll see what happens, the government will tell us soon enough. Okay? The government never ever was ready to supply an answer right up to almost the exams, of the Sec 4 exams. The turning point came, the turning point when the Chinese schools said, hold on, what's going on? Why is it we can't get these answers? We demand answers, we want to know what lies ahead. That turning point came, no surprises, when the PAP split, okay, between the Lee Kuan Yew faction and the left. The minute that happened, the left had to recognize that the PAP is no longer our government. Okay, we cannot trust that it has nothing but goodwill for the Chinese schools. Okay? So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that it is not quite accurate for the PAP to say that the Chinese school boycott incident, okay, was a communist plot right from the start. Because right from the start, there were no adverse reaction. There was a wait and see reaction. Similarly, for the Chinese school, let's call them the Chinese school arguments, that said that the PAP had been, from day one when they came to power, trying to stymie, trying to stifle, trying to cut down the Chinese schools. Not quite accurate either. Alright, they were pretty confident that this is their government, it would do justice to them as it promised. Okay? Now, all this is detail. The important thing that I want to stress, okay, is simply this, that history is not dangerous, history is not subversive. Okay? I think history is important for a society that has to understand its own complexities. Now, why? Sorry, I forgot the punchline. Why did the PAP government? Why was the PAP government unable to tell the Chinese schools? I really can't tell you what happens. You know, who's going to run the who's going to run the pre-university? I also don't know, because the teachers were not there, the textbooks were not there, and all that. The PAP government was unable to do that for a very simple reason. Alright, it was a new government, it was in a hurry, it was trying to change everything. Labor laws, health laws, you name them, they called themselves revolutionary. So even in education, the first parliament has said already, you know, we're going to revolutionize our education system. Changes in everything, from primary schools, everybody had to do primary 6, you know, secondary schools, textbooks were not yet written, polytechnics, a whole lot of expatriate, a whole lot of non-local lecturers had to leave. Everything was in a mess. Okay, and that is the simple explanation. They were not ready to offer polytechnics. They were not ready to have, properly thought out additional 2 years of secondary school. Okay? If not for the split, there would have been much more room, much more leeway for compromises. Okay? The logical thing to do, surely, was to say, look, we're not ready in 1961, why don't we defer by 1 year? By that time, when this kind of, by that time, when this became a stark reality, look, we're really not ready. Okay? For the PEP to say, okay, let's defer for 1 year, was seen as conceding defeat to the left. So they had to go through with it. Alright? And hence the students boycott. Right? So to me, sort of, this is history. We need to know the nitty-gritties instead of just going at the level of general arguments. Alright? And so my plea, I don't know maybe to who, okay, but my plea is that the National Archives should contain very basic documents of Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, whatever, but it doesn't. Okay? It doesn't, and yet, if you look into the National Archives website, okay, it says that we are the custodians of our nation's records, and we hold our governments to account. All right? Words that are taken from any archival pronouncements of any liberal democratic societies. Okay? The whole concept of National Archives actually started from France after the French Revolution. Whereas previously, archives were, of course, sort of royal prerogatives. Okay? So archives tied to a certain type of political system, which somehow our archives think that they are part of. Right? So, in a way, I have to bring this back to Coldstore, don't I? Okay, and I can. Okay. Commission of Inquiry was held on the boycott. It was a farce of Commission of Inquiry. It was nothing but a imposition. It went on for months and months and months. Every day, full reports in the Chinese press, in the English press, in all the presses, and then suddenly, no more interest. The press has lost interest in reporting it. Why? Because of Operation Coldstore. It took place before the Commission of Inquiry was over. It made the Commission of Inquiry totally unnecessary. Because the whole point of it was to pin it on the communists. The whole point of it was to decimate the opposition. Right? So, I don't think that this kind of narrative that I have given is at all complete. What I do not have is the documents of the Ministry of Education. Okay? And I believe that if historians have access to these materials, we would have a far more interesting history than just this, huge battle between two political forces. Okay, thank you.
以下我简单的把孔丽莎博士的讲话摘要的说一下。孔丽莎博士是本书的编辑之一，他以编辑的身份，向成书过程中得到的各方面的协助表达了谢忱。感谢的对象包括义务的翻译人员、本书的出版人和责任编辑。因为有了翻译，本书才能够同时出版英文和中文2个版本，读者群因此扩大，作者的文章因此能够接触到在一般情况下没有办法接触到的读者。因为出版人的通力合作，本书才能够在排期非常紧张的情况下面如期出版。本书的责任编辑则尽心尽力为本书的 各个环节把关，包括为新加坡政治被扣者名单做细心的对照和查证。已故陈仁贵律师是这一系列研究出版计划的发起人。孔博士说，如果不是3年前一位马来西亚学者的偶然提醒，连陈仁贵这么样一位深具历史意识的人，他都没有觉察到，2013年就是冷藏行动的50周年了。冷藏行动50周年，差一点就这么样悄无声息地溜过去。至于513学生运动和华惹编委被起诉事件，到了明年2014年，也就都满60周年了。这件事或者是这一类的事，充分地凸显了独立撰史、编辑史料的重要性。为了不使历史留白，孔博士希望当年投身反殖运动、建国运动的人，在有生之年提笔留下亲身经历的记录。历史不能够是当权者的一言堂。针对这本书，他指出，这基本上是一个前政治被扣者各自从不同角度，以不同的方式叙述亲身经历的一个合集。这是一个这些人站在2013年的当下，回首画当年的记录，可贵。虽然也许不一定是对那个历史阶段的唯一或者是最终的结论。另外，本书目前能够做到的，还只是限于身份是新加坡公民的前政治被扣者。孔丽莎博士本身是历史学家，他以自己从事1961年华校中式罢考事件研究的亲身经历，披露了学者在研究过程中所面对的种种困难和重重障碍。这些困难和障碍包括这个原始资料的没有办法得到，譬如堂堂的新加坡国家档案局居然没有办法提供教育部相关档案。事情为什么会这样？他问。无非因为同一个政府在位54年，这种情况不像其他地方一样，50年前发生的事已经是前朝史，在这里它牵涉的就是当前的政府，因此他的研究只好依赖当年的华文报章、立法议会的辩论、调查庭的记录等等。在研究当中，他发现事情并不是如政府说的那样，中式罢考是共产党策动的阴谋。然而，也不完全是参与罢考的人说的那样，行动党从一开始就有心消灭矮化华文教育。他根据这些进一步伸缩，教育部要是愿意公开当年的档案，也许就能够使当年的事态进一步得到清晰的呈现，有助于历史研究摆脱类型化的偏颇，深入了解事情的复杂性以及事态发展的来龙去脉。作为一个国家，他指出，作为一个国家，开放资料、尊重人民的职权是很有必要的。谢谢孔博士。张先生是我们下来的这个讲员。Our next speaker is Mr. Lee Di-dong. Let's listen to what he is going to say.
容许我站在这边讲话，坐下来我讲话不习惯。昨天我从国法那边借到这本书，我非常高兴。但是我一看之下，我的情绪就沉下来。你们看，这个封面里面只有一张椅子，四面空荡荡的，它给我带来很大的联想。这是什么呢？似乎是把我带回到监牢里面的那样的一个景象，所以使我不断的想，在监牢里面一些同志们怎么样的被虐待，一些人被迫遣送到国外去，一些人还死。当然不是死在监牢，不过和监牢被关被虐待是有关的，直到他早死。所以我不断想到这些，所以这本书我连一页都没有办法翻。我不回家，走到路边椅子上坐下来，我的思想不断的一种起伏。所以呢，监牢里面我们怎么样被虐待，这个故事讲不完，我也没有时间在这边讲，我只是简单的这么的一概括，似乎是这6个字：恐惧、坚持、希望。我们都是这样。我这边用一个小的例子来说明这个问题。有一天在牢里，我的一个同志默默地坐在那边，眼睛看着地。我上前去问他怎么啦？什么事吗？我连问3句，他不答我，然后从衣袋里面拿出一封信给我看。那是他的女儿，5岁的女儿给他写的信。信是这么说的：爸爸，你什么时候才回来？妈妈一直哭，一直流眼泪，现在眼泪都没有了。妈妈说我的眼睛很蒙，妈妈说看不见也好。我看到这个信，我似乎这个肺都要爆炸。所以也就是说，这样的一个小例子就可以说明我们在牢里面是怎么样的。所以在这里头，恐惧又要怎么坚持？只有坚持才能够看到希望。所以我只能够说用这样的简单来概括说牢内的情况。因为等一下我讲的呢不是这方面的问题，所以现在我就接着讲我的话啦。战争自从封建社会到今天不断连绵不断，死了多少人？殖民地的统治战争死了多少人？这些历史学家如果能够很好的统计一下，那是很有重要意义。因为这个反殖民地的斗争是一场的非常大的一种斗争。可以说我们在反殖民地胜利了以后呢，可以说就永远不再有呢这个殖民地的战争，甚至呢也可以说我们这个和平就在开始。所以呢，我们讲说战争， 我们认为说，英国人统治殖民地是非常丑恶的。他的丑恶到怎么样呢？就是掠夺财富，使到人民穷困。在教育上，他的压制民族的教育，以殖民地奴化的教育、奴役教育，所以使到这个社会落后。今天在非洲的一些国家，那么落后，就是殖民地统治的一种结果。有一句话说，哪里有压迫，就哪里会有斗争。是的，全世界的殖民地的统治下呢，人民普遍起来战斗，人民的斗争已经是变成一个大海洋，把统治者呢困在海洋的中间，斗争的波涛一波比一波强，统治者呢在挣扎，尤其是越南的一战，打败了法国帝国主义和美国帝国主义，所以在这里头说明了是人民反战争的一种胜利。所以我会这么觉得，殖民地的战争永远不会再有，以后很有可能大长的战争也不会有，人民也能够进入了这个和平的时代。我觉得和平是多么重要啊！刚才我开头的时候，战争死了多少人？殖民地的战争死了多少人？人民是不要战争，人民要是和平的。今天如果我们能够进入和平的年代，这个是历史一个重大的进步，也就是时代已经发展到这样的一个地步。所以我们呢，英国人比较早认识到殖民地统治不得人心，所以呢，他在50年代就开始联合限制。所以呢，我们新加坡才会有城市的左派政治斗争。但是统治者呢，他是正在推行他的计划，对吗？所以呢，57年马来亚独立，在新加坡为了扶持李光耀的政权，在这个63年的大选之前，也就是63年2月2号大逮捕，这个就是要确保行动党能够当政。接下来，同年10月8号又有一次的大逮捕，接下来不断的有多次的大逮捕。我们左翼的组织就这样的被压下来，所以今天新加坡所以就独立了。所以呢，今天我们的社会已经是进入了另外的一个阶段，就是精英集团统治下的资本主义。所以我们今后的斗争必然是为民生、为自由、为民主而斗争。当然，这个斗争是漫长的、长远的。不过，我们必须是要斗争，我们必须是要抖起22的这种精神，继续斗下去。在上一次的纪念大会上，傅斯凯先生就有提出，我们必须要用票箱来压行动党，要他去为人民做事。所以呢，我们今天也应该是继续用票箱来压行动党，是来实现我们人民的一种目标。所以呢，最后。谢谢大家。 话的补充。刚才我讲过，反殖民地的胜利是人民的胜利，不但是确保殖民地战争不会再来，同时以后大的战争也不会有。所以我说呢，世界和平的时代已经是开始。有关这些问题呢，也许大家有不同的意见，对吧？但是这个是一个重要的问题。如果大家有不同的意见，要和我交流，我欢迎。谢谢大家。
A brief summary of Mr. Lee Tee-tong's speech. In his speech, Mr. Lee Tee-tong points out that Singapore left-wing movement was suppressed and put down by a series of mass arrests. It is not defeated in a democratic election. In order to win in the general election 1963, LKY and his PAP collude with the colonial rulers and government of Federation of Malaya to execute the Operation Coldstore in February that year. 133 left-wing leaders, including leaders of political parties, trade unions, student organizations, and cultural groups, were captured and thrown into jail without trial. After the election, they continued the mass arrest, launched Operation Pecah in October that year. Follow that, arrest and detention of political opponents without trial became a conventional means of repression used by PAP. Thus, the left-wing movement was defeated. Nowadays, he points out that the domestic and international situation has changed dramatically. The concept of democracy, freedom, and improving living conditions of the people has become a universal value. No longer can the ruling party casually label those who are against them as communists and throw them in jail. Mr. Lee Tee-tong encouraged Singaporeans to use their vote in elections smartly. He believes that in this way, we can change and move our society towards a desired direction gradually. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Dr. P.J. Tham will be our next speaker. Let's listen to what Dr. Tham is saying.
Thank you very much. Like Mr. Lee, I'm not used to talking when sitting down, so I hope. Can I just borrow the podium? Okay, first off, I'd like to thank all the editors, the publishers, the translators, and of course my fellow authors who all did an incredible job. I think this book would not happen without them, so they deserve all the praise. All right. And second of all, to follow on what Lisa said, 1963 is also a very important anniversary elsewhere in the world. It's actually 50 years since the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And why is it that in America they remember such a national shame? Why do they remember that every year, and why do we not remember Coldstore? Because in America they take that event and they use it to remind them every year both of the horrendous depths that humanity can stoop to, and also of the greatest, loftiest ideals that we can aspire to. Human dignity, respect, justice. And for us, Operation Coldstore is the same thing. For us, I believe in the future we will remember it both for the depths and the heights. So instead of talking about my chapter, I think I'm just going to answer the basic 3 questions which I always get about Operation Coldstore and about merger and about all the things that happened in 1963. And those questions are very simply, why did merger happen? Why did Operation Coldstore happen? And were the detainees really communists? Now, why did merger happen? In fact, this was very unlikely in 1961 because after Malayan independence, after Federation independence in 57, the Tunku was growing less and less keen on bringing Singapore back into Malaya. Because of course, as we all know, Federation politics is based on racial voting blocks, and bringing all the Chinese back into Malaya, into the Federation, would have disrupted his own political base. So it's pure politics, plain and simple. So he did not want Singapore. Until 1961, and then suddenly he changed his mind. What happened in 1961 that changed the Tunku's mind? In a nutshell, the PAP did not do well in its first 2 years in government. In particular, its first year. As Lisa has mentioned, they were in a rush, they were revolutionaries, they were in a hurry, they changed everything. But they were very inexperienced. Let's not forget, the only job Lee Kuan Yew has ever had in government is that of a minister. He had zero experience when he became Prime Minister. So it's not surprising the PAP really struggled that first year. They threw out a lot of policies, they made a lot of mistakes. They actually cancelled their whole labor policy after a whole year of, some of my friends here, our fellow detainees, the trade unionists, they have been working on it a whole year. At the end of it, the PAP cabinet threw the whole thing out. So there was a lot of unhappiness within the party. But the PAP leadership compounded this by refusing to admit their mistakes. They refused to admit that anything was wrong. They were insufferably arrogant and smug. And that's a quote from the British. The British found the PAP cabinet insufferably arrogant and smug, and they said you need to be more humane and have a more understanding style of leadership, and Lee Kuan Yew refused. So you have these mistakes, you have this arrogance, they were refusing to listen to experts in their own party. But most of all, and I think the worst thing, is they moved away from the promises they had been elected on. And most importantly of all those promises was their pledge to release all the political detainees. You will remember in 56 and 57, the colonial government with Lim Yew Hock arrested a lot of the political activists in Singapore, right? And the PAP campaigned explicitly saying, we will release these people. And then when, after the PAP won the election, Lee Kuan Yew went to Lim Chin Siong, he went to Fong Swee Suan, that whole group, and he said, I promise you I will release them. But apart from releases in 59, by early 1960, no one was being released. So the PAP membership kept going to Mr. Lee and saying, why aren't you releasing the detainees? You promised to release the detainees. Why are you not fighting for the release of detainees? And this was the biggest issue. So the question is, why is this so important? Well, you have to remember, colonial Singapore was a very discriminatory place. Very discriminatory. From the 1930s onwards especially, right, the colonial government exercised extreme discrimination, especially if you were Chinese educated, Chinese speaking, and if you were poor. First the colonial government in the 30s, then the Japanese in the 40s, and then the colonial government again from 1945 onwards. Singapore was very discriminatory, it was very unfair. And so our friends were fighting for a more equal, more meritocratic, fairer Singapore. This was the big issue for them. And in 1956, despite all the achievements of the PAP, the colonial government, despite all the achievements of the political left, of the trade unionists, the colonial government was able to freeze all this in its tracks. They were able to completely destroy Singapore's incipient civil rights movement, a multiracial, multi-ethnic civil rights movement. How? By using detention against all its leaders. So the left, the progressive left, realized it doesn't matter what your achievements are in the political field. If the colonial government can simply come and arrest all of you, what does it matter what you achieve, what laws you pass, if the colonial government can simply arrest all of you? And this is why detainees, the issue of detention was so important to them. And that is why, in their minds, colonialism, oppression, its main manifestation in Singapore was detention, was the use of detention, was the detention law. And that was why they campaigned specifically for the law to be in the hands of a locally elected, locally responsible, democratically responsible representative government. It's important to note they didn't campaign to get rid of the laws. They said the laws, okay, if the laws are what the people want, that's fine, but they must be controlled by a democratic government. And that is why the issue of detainees was so important. But Lee refused. He refused to pursue this method, right? But because his own party would not support him, he turned to the Malayan Communist Party for support. He struck secret deals with the communists to support him. And then he lost the Hong Lim by-election and the Anson by-election, and he realized, actually, the Malayan Communist Party is useless. They have no influence in Singapore. Either that or they're unwilling to help me. I don't know why, but he realized that he could not rely on the MCP. And the British also did not want a progressive left party to take power. But they could not intervene in the democratic process in Singapore without being accused of trying to rig the whole democratic decolonization process. So Lee needed something to campaign on. He needed to go to the 1963 election with something in hand saying, look, Singapore, I promised and I delivered. But what could that be? The economy was taking a long time to turn around. Crime was getting worse. Housing would take years to build. But the one issue he could deliver straight away, that he could control, that was universally popular in Singapore, was merger. And so he resolved, I will make merger happen, and then I can go to the election, campaign on the basis of merger, and say, look, Singapore, you should re-elect me because I delivered what all of you wanted. But, here's the big but. The British wanted merger, right? But the Tunku does not want merger. So Lee has to go to the Tunku and tell them, look, there's a massive communist conspiracy in Singapore, and if you don't merge with Singapore, Singapore will become a Cuba on your doorstep, a source for instability. And the British also went to the Tunku and basically bribed him by saying, if you merge with Singapore, if you take on Singapore, if you protect our naval base in Singapore, we will give you North Borneo and Sarawak. And so after a lot of negotiation, a lot of pleading, a lot of back and forth, the Tunku agreed to merge. But all this was done in secret. When the Tunku got up in May 1961 to say, sooner or later we should have this closer association, only the British and the PAP cabinet knew what he meant. The rest of the public simply said, oh, the Tunku's been saying that since 1955, what's new? But a month later, news leaked that merger was happening, and immediately everyone erupted in surprise and shock. People said, wait a moment, right? You're going to completely change our country, our constitution, you're going to turn us into Malaysians, and you never even told Parliament, you never consulted us. What is this? This is not democracy, this is not government. This is some secret deal in a smoky back room. So people demanded answers. What is Malaysia? Is Singapore simply going to trade one colonial master, the British, for another, the Federation government? What on earth is merger? And they wanted answers. And the PAP backbenchers, the trade unionists, the activists, the PAP membership demanded answers. This is going to change all our lives, and you won't even tell us what's happening. But rather than face his party, Lee chose to purge his party of the people who opposed him. And all of them left in July 1961, and in August they formed the Barisan Socialists. Now, the Tunku, of course, was terrified of the Barisan. He told the British, they have incredible organizational skills. And the man he was most terrified of was Lim Chin Siong. He talked about this inspirational, talismanic presence, Lim Chin Siong. One word from Lim Chin Siong and all the Chinese will rise up against me. So he said, if you want merger, you must arrest all of them. And that is where the origin of Operation Coldstore comes from. It is part of the deal to create Malaysia. The Tunku demanded arrests. Now the British had a problem because they said, well, these people are not communists. We don't have any evidence against these people. We can't just go and arrest them. We have a lot of problems because in 1959, the British had been hit by colonial scandals in Kenya and Nyasaland, which today is Malawi. So their reputation around the world was of this evil imperialist master. And the British Conservative government said, if we go and just arrest these people without evidence, we will lose the next election. Funny how democracy has an effect on governments, make them do the right thing. So the British said, we can't arrest these people, we have no evidence. Now Lee Kuan Yew, of course, said, oh, you want to arrest these people, fine. But I don't want to take responsibility. If you arrest them before merger, before Malaysia is created, everyone will blame me like they blame Lim Yew Hock. And look at Lim Yew Hock today. His alliance party is, it's a shell of his former self. No one wants to vote for them. So I cannot take responsibility. So we should have arrests after merger. And the Tunku got angry and actually called him up to KL and scolded him and said, no, you will have arrests before merger, or I will forget about merger and you can have Singapore to yourself and lose the next election for all I care. So Lee Kuan Yew, of course, was forced to agree. Of course, then when he went back to the British, he told the British, oh yeah, I changed my mind, I thought we should have arrests before merger. Yeah, so I went and I convinced the Tunku and he agreed. Of course, the British then, talked to the Tunku and they found the real story. So, here's the problem. The British say we can't have arrests unless we have evidence. And there's no evidence. So the Tunku and Lee told Special Branch of Federation Singapore to come up with evidence. And they worked and they came up with a paper which they gave to the British. And Selkirk, the commissioner, the British commissioner, looked at it and said, this is ridiculous. But okay, we'll be fair. We'll give it to our professionals, and he gave it to MI5, right? He gave it to the head of MI5 in Singapore to evaluate. And the head of MI5 looked at this paper, read through it, and wrote a report that basically said, all this evidence is a load of rubbish. He said it was basically entirely surmise. It was just speculation. There were no facts. He noted 4 main deficiencies in this paper. He said that in spite of intensive investigations, no evidence has been obtained of Communist Party directions to open front workers. No evidence has been obtained. Number 2, he said that just because you have the same goal as the communists does not make you a communist. Right? We all want Singapore's independence, we all want merger with Malaysia. That doesn't make us communists. The third thing he said was that Special Branch are very highly trained individuals. It is inconceivable that such a massive communist conspiracy exists in Singapore and we have no idea. Okay, sure, maybe a conspiracy can exist, but Special Branch would have picked up something. If it was as big as you say it is, Special Branch would have picked up something, but we have nothing. And fourth, he noted that this Communist United Front that was described in the Special Branch paper was so broad, it basically labelled everyone who was unhappy with the PAP government as a communist. So he described, individual ambition, industrial grievance, Chinese nationalism, people with housing problems, peasants who've been thrown off the land, students who, can't go to school anymore. All these problems, all of these people in this paper were labelled communists. And so he concluded that the part played by the Communist Party of Malaysia in this process is not known and can merely be surmised, but it can be stated with some confidence that whether or not the Barisan could obtain power constitutionally, there is no Communist Party organization in Singapore capable of assuming political power whatsoever. So let me get this straight. Let me say this. Were the Barisan and other detainees of Operation Coldstore part of a communist conspiracy? No. No, no, no. Why was Coldstore carried out? Well, you recall the Tunku said, if no Coldstore, if no arrest, no Malaysia. And the British wanted to ensure their base was under the control of a friendly pro-Western Federation government. And Lee Kuan Yew wanted his political opposition neutralized. Right? And the Tunku wanted the Borneo states. So somehow they have to find an excuse. They have to find some reason for Operation Coldstore. And that happened December 8th, 1962, when the Brunei Rebellion broke out. And suddenly they have this excuse because there's a violent rebellion in British maritime Southeast Asia. And so they can say, oh, as a precaution against the violence spreading, we arrested other people. And now they were helped by the fact that the Barisan, out of principle, released a statement supporting the rebellion. And of course, the Barisan had done that many times before. They supported the violence, anti-colonial violence in Aden, in Cyprus, in South Africa, in Irian Jaya, and nothing had ever happened to them. In fact, the last one, Irian Jaya, the PAP had also supported it. So when they released that statement, right, it was for them a matter of routine and a matter of principle. As Lim Chin Siong said at the time, you can't stop being anti-communist when you know someone's going to arrest you. That's just being a hypocrite. So they released that statement, and immediately the British and the Federation and the PAP grabbed it and said, look, the Barisan are supporting violent revolution, violent subversion in Brunei. We have an excuse to arrest them. But of course, the fact is the Sarawak United People's Party condemned the violence and the British arrested them. And then the socialists in the Federation didn't say anything about the violence, and the Federation arrested them. So really, anything the Barisan had done didn't matter. What mattered is the Brunei Rebellion broke out, and now they had an excuse to arrest the Barisan. And so that's why Operation Coldstore was approved, right? And when Selkirk, the commissioner, wrote to London for approval to conduct the arrest, you know what he talked about in his telegram? Not some evidence of violence or communist conspiracy. He spent the bulk of his telegram saying, look, there is no way now we can deny the Federation government these arrests without them saying that we are acting in bad faith and backing out the merger. If we want Malaysia, we have to approve the arrest. And he goes on about this. And then at the end of it, he appends 6 lines at the bottom of the page saying, oh, I have some new evidence, that Lim Chin Siong has not renounced violence. And if you look at the quote, it's taken so far out of context. Right? Lim Chin Siong is talking about something else entirely, and Selkirk uses it and says, oh, he supports violence. So the whole point of Coldstore, right, was to eliminate this political opposition, and they found that excuse. And Coldstore was scheduled for 16 December 1962. But of course, as we know, Coldstore didn't happen the 2nd February. And what happened? Well, the problem was, on the very day, the very night that Coldstore was supposed to happen, Lee Kuan Yew inserted 15 names into the arrest list. And the British and the Federation said, who are these people? Why are you arresting innocent, why are you adding the names of innocent people to the arrest list? And he said, well, the fact is that after Coldstore happens, I'm worried that my political popularity will fall. So I need to arrest these people so that at the next election, there is no alternative to the PAP. So the Tunku got angry and he said, you can't manipulate these arrests for your own political purposes. A bit ironic that, but the Tunku was very angry. And of course, Lee said, no, my political survival depends on this. And both men refused to back down, so the whole thing collapsed. So everyone was left stewing, and Lee, went off in a tantrum, and he went to Cameron Highlands to play golf with Norodom Sehanu. And so for 2 months, everyone just sat around waiting, and as the British went back and forth, shuttle diplomacy, and finally they gave Lee Kuan Yew 2 concessions. The first is that the post-arrest press statement would say that, that would refer to Malaysia. This would allow Lee to say that, oh, merger was dependent on the arrest, so my hands were tied. I didn't want the arrest, but we want merger, so we gotta have the arrest, so what am I supposed to do? Right? That's a major concession. But even worse, they let him insert 3 of the 15 names back into the arrest list. 3 people they knew were completely innocent, had nothing to do with any of this political opposition that they were worried about. 3 people who were completely harmless, but they let Lee insert and destroy the lives of 3 people and put it back into that list for his own political gain. So, Operation Coldstore then went ahead on the morning of 2nd February, and you know the rest. So let me make 2 conclusions, 2 very important points in my conclusion. The creation of Malaysia was a political act. It was not about reunifying a divided Malayan people. Of course, the government sold it as such, but the creation of Malaysia was a political act. It was Lee Kuan Yew's and the PAP's unpopularity that drove the timing of merger. It provided the opportunity for merger. Without it, merger might never have happened. And for Lee and the PAP, the whole point of merger was an issue on which they could campaign on and win the 1963 election. For the British, merger was about protecting their strategic and political interests in Singapore, particularly the naval base. And so they convinced the Tunku to agree to merger by promising him the Borneo territories and promising him, that Singapore would be much more controllable and stable, and after the creation of Malaysia. And his condition was the arrest of Singapore's progressive left, the arrest of Singapore's political opposition. So throughout all this, the calculations were chiefly political. And my second point was that there was never a security case for Operation Coldstore. To this day, the ISD will tell you that Operation Coldstore was carried out to stop a communist conspiracy. I quote a Ministry of Home Affairs statement of 23 September 2011, which says that the detainees were detained not for their political beliefs, but because they had involved themselves in subversive activities which posed a threat to national security. This is simply not true. The UK has now declassified almost all their documents relating to Operation Coldstore and merger. So we can see the same documents, the same evidence, the same cases that are in the Special Branch and now ISD archives at New Phoenix Park. And this evidence is very clear. There was never any evidence that the Operation Coldstore detainees were engaged in any communist conspiracy. And I'll say this again, in case the microphone malfunctioned, the cameras didn't capture it, or you guys didn't hear it the first time. If you want to take out your phones and record me, go ahead. I will say this one more time, loud and clear. I want to make this very, very clear. Special Branch and the ISD does not have any evidence that the Operation Coldstore detainees were engaged in any communist conspiracy. Come back to what I started with. If we want to be a great country, if we want Singapore to have a great future, we need to remember Operation Coldstore. And we need to give justice to our friends here and remember the sacrifices that they went through. Thanks very much. Before I forget, if you want to learn more about this, I'm giving a talk on this exact subject. It will be an hour. On the 20th, this Wednesday at 7 p.m. My email address is in the book, so buy the book, email me if you want to come, and I'll give you information about where the talk is, and it will be followed by a roundtable on internal security in Singapore today. Thanks very much.
下面是这个谭炳新博士讲话的摘要。谭炳新博士指出，他通过查证英国官方的解密文件，尝试勾勒出当时事态的这个真相，包括合并计划提出的真正原因，英国、新加坡、马来亚联合邦当时在进行合并谈判时候各自的盘算。 三方当政者开展冷藏行动，大规模扫荡、逮捕左翼的内情。他的研究，他关于这个马来西亚合并的这个研究指向两个结论。第一个，大马合并计划提出是当政者对马来亚包括新加坡人民 争取祖国统一这种爱国情怀和意愿的扭曲和操纵，行动党应殖民统治当局和马来亚联合邦政权推动合并计划，目的是想从中捞取政治利益。行动党在方林和安顺补选落败，李光耀希望能够摆脱政治困境。 利用这个人民争取祖国统一的爱国情怀，用合并作为下一届竞选的这个竞选课题。英国人认为合并对他维护在东南亚的经济和战略利益有好处，所以联合向东姑游说，要东姑接受和新加坡合并，否则新加坡很可能就会落到共产党手里。那么，为了缓和 东姑这个担心新加坡华人人口会影响合并后的人口结构，英国当局甚至倡议把天然资源丰富的北婆和沙劳越也纳入这个合并计划，争取东姑接受。第二个结论，新加坡内部安全局现在还在坚持采取 冷藏行动是为了致使共产党颠覆国家的阴谋。 2011年9月23日，新加坡内政部发表声明说，在冷藏行动中被逮捕扣留的人，不是因为他们的政治信仰，而是因为这些人参加颠覆活动，对国家造成威胁。可是今天公开的这个证据显示，这种说法完全不是事实。根据解密的文件，其实早在1962年，马来亚联合邦政权就已经提出，要接受和新加坡合并的这个一个条件是要新加坡大规模的扫荡新加坡左翼。当时没有马上落实大逮捕，主要是找不到借口。可是，当1962年12月8日文莱所谓武装叛变事件发生以后，当政三方立刻就用这个大做文章，而且在这个2013年2月2日开展了这个冷藏行动。原来被英国情报局推翻的所谓共产党颠覆的证据，这个时候都通通拿回来作为展开逮捕的这个行动依据。刚才是这个谭博士讲话的这个摘要。下来我们这个请这个卢妙萍这个大姐给我们讲话。
各位朋友，还有各位老友，今天呢，我们在这里纪念冷藏行动50周年，来推荐我们这本记录冷藏行动事件的新书。我们主要的目的就是想要提醒大家，历史的真相绝不容被湮灭。行动党口口声声自称他们是这个世界上执政最久的民选政党，他们这个丰功伟业是怎么样得来的？现在就让大家看看，在这本书里面的这一份名单，名单上所收集的人数是远远低于实际的人数，但是它已经足够扮演一面照妖镜，将赤裸裸地揭露行动党长期执政的真面目，使白衣人现出原形。在2011年5月，我们情绪513这本书出版之后，在陈仁贵的建议下，我就开始收集这些老友的名单。现在我再告诉大家怎么样收集这些我们这些朋友的这些名字。我们知道政府扣留我们从来是不刊登或者发布详细的这些名单，所以是很多的困难。我首先呢是从我们追悼我们的一些朋友，左翼领袖过世的那些报纸上的刊登的挽词的这些名字，以及旧的《中英文报》，还有就是《阵线报》各职工团体的以及进步团体的出版物，还有加上个别人士的回忆录，收集到第一批的名字。1963年22冷藏行动被扣留的人士呢，是从维基夫的一篇文章里面所附带的那些名字。我也到国家图书馆去查阅那些旧的《中英文报》的交代，就是回林 从那里收集到另一批的名字。难的是我们周围的朋友，还有一些热心的人士，听到了消息，他们纷纷的伸出援手，他们收集一些资料，还有就是联络一批又一批的朋友，把那些被扣留人的名字交给我，在大家的合作底下，我才能够收集到这一份超过1000人的这个名单。2011年11月23日，副总理张志贤在回答非选区议员罗文丽女士的询问，透露，从1959年到1990年这31年之内，他们一共扣留了2460人，其中1045人是在维护公安法令以及内部治安法令底下被扣留的。政府居然扣留了这么多人，他们应该有责任公布他们的名单以及他们被扣留的详细情形，我们人民有权利知道。这是附带这本书里面的这些名单，是用鲜血与泪水编制的。出现在这个名单的人，不是在警系法令，就是在维护公共安全法令以及内部治安法令下被扣留的。他们其中有些人被扣留的日子长的令人难以置信。谢太保，摄政的国会议员，被扣留了32年；林福寿医生20年；顾书改医生17年；马来先锋报赛扎哈利被扣留了也是17年，还有很多人被扣留超过10年、9年、8年，数也数不清。谢太保，他被监禁在监牢里面26年，再加上等于是软禁的居住地点6年，一共32年。当他在提起他被扣留的事件的时候，感叹着说：“我一生最美好的日子就被逼在监牢里度过。”行动党，你想我们听到这样的话，是不是很令人感到心痛的事呢？行动党就是利用一上台就是利用殖民地政府的公安法令，践踏年轻人的生命，将成千上百的爱国青年的青春与智慧活生生的埋葬在监狱里，以达到他们长期执政的目的。所以他的丰功伟业是这样来的。今天白衣人一直不断的强调，他们世界上是执政最长久的民选政党，是这样吗？我们大家都记得，1959年行动党能够上台，就完全靠由林清祥领军的左翼阵营的支持。到了60年代，林清祥已经被驱逐出行动党，另组社会主义政见，准备参加63年的大选。我们大家都知道，林清祥在当时的声望以及他受欢迎的热度是不可以置疑的。历史学家就是我们孔丽莎博士，在他的一篇文章里，永远消失的握手中指出，1963年大选，行动党就将林清祥与他的团队送进牢房， 剥夺了他一个与李光耀对垒的机会。世界上执政最久的政党，没有经过选票战严格的检验，林清祥受欢迎的程度，以及他可能成为新加坡总理的神话继续流传下去。如果林清祥今天还健在，他肯和李光耀握手吗？你们说他会跟李光耀握手吗？如果他拒绝，白衣人不能够出版。没了林清祥的握手，冷藏行动毁灭了左派参加新加坡政治选举的问题将继续受到争议。行动党想通过这个无瑕疵的神话，不是最后的结论。对付公安法令才是行动党赖以长期施政的硬工具，这是历史真相，绝不容被湮灭。正义一定要得以伸张。最后，我想告诉大家，我是怎么样收集这些名字的。因为3、4年我只收到800人的名字，所以是不到政府扣留人数的1半。那么其中也有许多错误，资料也不够。名单上空白的，就是我们没有得到的、没有办法收集到的资料。那么我们希望读者们，如果发现其中有错误，或者你们所知道的，希望大家通知我们编辑部，在今后重新出版的时候，我们会修正。我们也准备把名单放到网上去，让大家查阅。那希望大家能够多多帮我们提供一些资料，使我们这个名单更加的完整，就是也让这个事情让历史，就是这本书切了一角，就是我们左派的历史，希望能够尽大家的努力把这一只脚补上去。谢谢。
谢谢卢大姐。Brief summary of Madam Low's speech. In the book launches today, there is a list of political detainees in Singapore since 1950. This is compiled by Madam Low. PAP claims that they have held power for over half a century and remains the world's longest standing popularly elected political party. Was the PAP's long rule really achieved through the people's will? This is the question asked by Madam Low in her speech. She argues that the list of political detainees in Singapore that she compiled for the book is a mirror that will show the demon's face of what it is. The image in the mirror shows that the PAP won power through the blood and tears of detainees. Madam Low took up this difficult task of compiling the list in May 2011 under request by late Tan Jin Kui. The idea was to let readers know who the victims were and who benefited from the ISA. The authorities have never disclosed the complete list of dissidents who were detained. There are many whose names were never made public or published. In doing this, Madam Low began by looking up the list of the names in condolence message in the newspaper to families of left-wing leaders when they died, as well as old Chinese and English language newspaper, 正宪报, publication of trade unions and progressive organizations, and memoir of various individuals, and also the publication of Political Detainees Association. She is grateful to a group of her friends. They collected and provided her with the information. Altogether, she managed to put together over 1,000 names in the list. Nevertheless, this is still less than half the total of 2,460, the figure of detainees given by the Deputy Prime Minister Liu Zhijian. The hard truth is that the ISA has been the long-term blunt weapon used by the PAP government. The historical truth cannot be allowed to be covered up. Justice must prevail. Madam Low challenged that, having put such a large number of people under detention, the PAP surely has the responsibility of publishing their names and their conditions under detention, about which people have the right to know. That's one